All right, welcome to Peeling Syd Barrett. This will be episode number 4, and I'm going to call this The Boy and the Lion. And within this episode, I'd like to discuss what I consider to be a pivotal piece of artwork in the understanding of Mr. Roger Syd Barrett. Before we move on, I want to call out a few things in the last episode. And again, that last episode about Arnold Lane is marked as adult, so not everyone can get access to it. But there were a few things in there that I either forgot to include or I just mistakenly said, and I'd like to address those really quick before we move on. The first one is when we were discussing the Osiris and Isis myth, I said they were a Greek myth, and I think I just had Greek freeze on the brain or something. But those are Egyptian stories. I do believe that there was an Isis cult that was continued within Greece afterwards, or spread through that region. And I don't know the whole history of it, but the point is, the Osiris, Isis, Horus story is an Egyptian story, and it's not a Greek story. Now, the second thing that I'd like to address is, at one point I was discussing the slang term of the use of a man wearing a beard and how that relates to a gay man attempting to fit in with normal straight society. Now, when you say normal, it's kind of a tricky thing to use because the word implies what is normal or what by opposite is what is abnormal. And I don't know exactly how to put this, but what I was attempting to say was that what the average person views as normal in their worldview is normal. I'm not saying that one is right or wrong or anything, and I hope nobody took it that way. But the intent was to relay the way that other people might view a person that's trying to live out a relationship or a series of relationships that probably don't fit within the other person's worldview. So there's a pressure on those people to conform to what other people consider to be normal. That's the point I was trying to relay. The third thing I'd like to discuss, and I just kind of breezed through this really fast, was Andrew Lang. So Andrew Lang kind of sounds like Arnold Lane. Perhaps it was a reference to Andrew Lang. I don't have anything from Andrew Lang, and I'm going to order some stuff. And in the future, if I recognize anything, then I'll make a statement at that point in time. But for now, I'd just like to give a little bit of information about Andrew Lang and why he may have been interesting to Syd. The first is that Mr. Lang wrote about a number of topics, including fairies, and also provided some psychic discussions. Apparently, he was into psychical research, which quite a few people classify as a pseudoscience. I don't know necessarily that it's useless, as Friedrich Nietzsche kind of points out in his discussions on the Old and the New Testament. You can find worth and value in things even though you don't necessarily believe them to be 100% true. And that's an interesting point to make. So I do think that there's worth in almost anything that you could learn about. How you choose to apply it to your life is really up to you, and how important that is to you is kind of up to you. So I do want to go through Mr. Lang's work, and in particular read through some of his psychic discussions. And I guess he did a Blue Fairy book that I'll try and get a hold of those and see if I can correlate those to any songs. The last thing that I didn't do in the last video was I didn't really bring up guitar work for Arnold Lane. And this is just a really small something, but I'd like to point out that the intro to Arnold Lane goes something like this. So he slides in an ascending fashion in a 1-2 and a 1-2 chord. And that is the same idea that he uses in Terrapin when he slides into an E. And I don't want to play too much of the songs because I don't want to get hit for some kind of copyright violation or whatever, or get demonetized. But the basic point is those are two chords that he slides into on two different songs, and not everybody does that. It's not a big deal. It wouldn't be hard to do that, but it is something that I guess you could kind of classify as a signature of sorts that he uses in some of his songs. It's a really simple point, but I just wanted to make it. So let's go ahead and move on then to The Boy and the Lion. And I want to give a little bit of background information really quick. Now, Roger Barrett, Syd as we're calling him at this point, since that was what he was calling him at this point in his life, was born on the 6th of January in 1946, and his father was Arthur Max Barrett. And his father was a prominent pathologist, and I believe he had some portion of a hospital named after him not too long ago in Cambridge. And he was related to an Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who was a suffragist and a physician. This is all information that you can find on Wikipedia. Now, she was a suffragist and a physician, so there's a kind of a history of science-related skills within the family. And apparently, Syd's father, Arthur, was very well respected and was also a very hard worker, very dedicated to his craft. Now, about 2 weeks before Syd was going to 2 weeks before Christmas, and a month before Syd was going to become 16, his father died of cancer, and this was apparently a long drawn out kind of a process that was very painful for his father. And I'm going to go ahead and refer you to a book titled A Very Irregular Head by Rob Chapman, and the subtitle is Life of Syd Barrett. And this book, to me, it's from Capo Press, and let me see, where's the copyright in here? 2010. So copyright in 2010. I'll provide all the information for the book in the description. I would like to point out that this book is, I think, a very kind and mannerly review. It's a very humane discussion of Syd and the family. And I feel that this gentleman, Rob Chapman, I don't have any affiliation with him. He doesn't with me either. But I think he gives a very poignant and familial discussion on Syd. And for that reason, it's easy to read. And he also is able to relay stories, I think, because he genuinely loves the stories. He loves the topic. He actually saw Syd Barrett in his last concert, I believe, or his last gig that he performed at. One of the last ones. He discusses that story. And he's kind of a fan of Syd Barrett. And some people would say, he's not really a reliable source of information then if he's a fan. I don't really buy into that. I think someone can care about someone or care about a topic and still be pretty level-headed about it, and I think he is within this book. So there's a few things that he mentions in this book, and one of them is about, on page 37, Libby, who was, I believe, Syd Barrett's girlfriend at the time, discusses kind of walking around on eggshells in the house because every now and then his father would kind of scream out in pain. And I guess, I don't know, and this is kind of a hard one to talk about. Again, I didn't want to talk about too many personal things because I just wanted to relay the work. But in order to understand this painting that we're going to go into, I think we need to really understand the nature of this portion of Mr. Barrett. Now, you can imagine what it's like to be in a house with someone who's dying of cancer, and some people have had to suffer through that. Obviously, everyone dies at some point in time, but as an example, Roger Waters also lost his father, and his father was, he wasn't fighting in the war. I believe he was some kind of auxiliary, and he was killed. So Roger Waters lost his father, but he didn't directly experience the death of his father. In a way that's better, in a way it's worse. I mean, those are all things that if anyone has gone through the process of losing someone that they really care about, there are arguments to be made for being there with them when they pass. And there are also things about the nature of passing that are very difficult for people to kind of incorporate or assimilate into their mind. It's a very difficult thing to do, especially when someone is just 14, 15, 16, I don't know, even 12, 13 years old. That is a really difficult thing to kind of process, because in our society, you could argue that in Western society, when you have a family that's split, that's not a really large family. In other words, you don't have aunties and uncles and everybody and the grandparents all living together in one house. You have your direct nuclear family, and everyone else is just kind of satellite families. They're off somewhere, you know about them, but you don't directly experience their lives on a daily basis, and they don't directly experience your life. So when someone who's living in that lifestyle experiences the direct death of someone that they really care about and are living with on a daily basis, at that point they are forced to kind of wake up and realize the importance of death, the immediacy of death. And so that's kind of what I want to relay with that discussion. In the book as well, Rob Chapman's book, he discusses that there's kind of a Quaker tradition that was a part of his parents' life or mentalities. He doesn't really say that they are Quakers. He just kind of says that there was a Quaker tradition that was part of their mentality. And finally, I'd like to relay that on page 25, people that knew Syd Barrett early on mentioned his work ethic and how he would go and paint even when he didn't have to. So when Syd loves doing something, he's applying himself to that even when school isn't requiring it, which is the dedication that's required to really become a master of some kind of a profession. So that's kind of all the contextual information that I want to give about this. I want to point out that his father was very dedicated and he worked very hard and was very well respected. That probably would have impacted Syd. He would have seen that and he would have realized, you know, it's hard to have a dad that's like that and not feel obligated to kind of try and live up to that in some fashion. Not to idolize your dad as well. So if you see other people that are doing that, especially if you're a young man, you see people idolizing your dad and respecting him, you're going to want to also live up to that. Now, for me, I just want to point out, I had an uncle that died pretty young, and his daughter was about my age at the time. So she was about 14, I'm going to say. And it impacted her a lot, and I'm not sure she totally recognized how much it was impacting her at the time. And he also, by the way, died of cancer, and it was kind of rough. I saw in my cousin a desperation that she didn't have before. And I can't help but wonder if that process doesn't bring out something in people that makes them realize the immediacy of life. And everyone else just kind of goes through life like a zombie, not recognizing the immediacy and the value of daily life. but it's brought home to people that have gone through that experience. So I'm going to link a couple videos. One of them is of Roger Waters, and he's discussing Syd Barrett and his work. And if you can't get to the link, it's basically a Roger Waters interview about Syd Barrett, and it's by sbricciolo, sbricciolo. And about 2 minutes in, he's going to mention the painting that we're going to discuss. Now, I want you to pay attention to how he kind of discusses that painting and how he discusses Syd Barrett. I would suggest that you listen to it all the way through for like 3 minutes or so, 3.5 minutes. Discuss how he describes Syd Barrett and how he describes his impression of the painting. Okay? And then I want you to go ahead and take a look at the painting itself. There is a collection of Syd's artwork that's put together by someone named Post Toasty, and I'll link the video. But if you want to search for it on your own, it's Post, like P-O-S-T, and then Toasty, T-O-A-S-T-I-E. And the title of that video is Artwork by Roger Keith Syd Barrett, and there's more to it, but that should be enough of a word search for you to find it. About 15 seconds in, you're going to see a piece of artwork that Syd made early in his, I'm going to say, adult life. So this is probably when he was just starting out, or not long before he was starting out as a member of Pink Floyd and had gone to London. Essentially what it is as Roger Waters describes it, there's a coliseum with kind of 2 angles to it, painted in the background. There's a lot of faces in the background. There are lions, and they are going to devour a family. And so I want you to look at that, take notes of it as you see fit, consider what's being discussed, and then come back and I'm going to tell you what some of my thoughts are about that piece of artwork. And I'm going to apologize in advance, but I am not going to give you the entirety of that painting because it's a copyright painting, and I don't want to have this eventually get challenged under copyright. So what I'm going to do is like I said, I give you the link, you can look at it, and then as I discuss very specific portions of that painting, I will show a picture of just that particular thing. And in that way, I hope that because I'm providing a discussion and kind of a critique of very specific things within the painting, I won't be violating the copyright. I'll be using kind of a fair use, I'll be adhering to fair use guidelines. So that's what I'm hoping to do. Go ahead and take a look at it, and we'll come back and discuss. All right, hopefully you had a couple moments to listen to Mr. Roger Waters' interpretation of the painting and his impressions of Syd Barrett. And you also got a chance to actually look at the painting itself. And of course, the painting is of 3 figures in a foreground in a coliseum of some sort with lions and a bunch of people in the background with some arches. So I'd like to point out a few things if I could really quick. Let's start with Mr. Waters' interpretation of some things. The first is his description of Syd Barrett as this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, happy-go-lucky, bouncy-walk guy. And I'd like to say, from my point of view, in my opinion, that's already incredibly disturbing. Because we know that Mr. Barrett had gone through difficulties with his father dying only 3 or 4 years before that. So that, and I haven't found, read, or seen anything about people actually discussing Syd working through the trauma of that. So it makes you really think that he just kind of buried it, and perhaps he was working on it on his own, but that's a very lonely thing to do. And maybe, you know, as a young man, we're kind of taught to put on a happy face and just ignore pain and whatever else. But I imagine that that's even worse for some people in England. There's kind of a rigid social system there, and I wonder if that was something that kind of was a problem for him. So from the beginning, if I met someone like that today and they told me, oh, their father died of cancer 3 or 4 years ago, and they were totally happy-go-lucky and bouncy, I'd say, oh man, this person hasn't really worked through it yet. Or they're presenting a facade that is not really tied directly to who they are and what they feel. So, again, not saying that's what's happening, but it is interesting to me that people don't really seem to acknowledge that. Now, another thing that I want to kind of point out is that, as we mentioned with Mr. Rob Chapman's book and the Quaker tradition that was apparently influential on his parents, the two lines of arches in the background can take another meaning now, and that would be the possibility of a cross. I'd like to point out that there are dark spaces in the arches, and that there is a figure in blue walking in the background towards one of those arches that's filled with darkness, and that could be a representation of his father. I'd like to point out that the family's faces are all horrified, and that all the onlookers up in the Coliseum they're just a bunch of faces, but they're all smiling and having a great time. Now, the family itself is what appears to be a mother with a son and a daughter. The daughter is back to us, so we can't really see her face, but she does have long, medium-length hair like the mother does. And she is smaller in stature than the boy. So this could very easily be a representation of Syd, his mom, and his little sister Rosemary. And Syd was the fourth of 5 children, and Rosemary was the fifth. There are other members of the family that aren't shown here, but for purposes of interpretation, you have to think that Syd is relaying people that he has a direct connection to. So his mother, his father, and his sister. And that's interesting to me because she obviously has a connection to him with all the interviews and all the work that she's done for his artwork. So it's interesting to me that he also here is showing a connection to her. The lion mouths are ravenous. And I guess the last thing I'd like to point out is that the groundwork, the sand of the Coliseum, is very delicately done in color and tone. The lions kind of look depraved, almost maniacal. And the blending of color of the sand and the blending of tone is not easy to do. Not everybody can do that. So that's pretty impressive to me. I guess that's pretty much it on that particular painting. I would like to point out that it's interesting to me that someone like Roger Waters could look at this painting and not pick up on any of the things that I just mentioned. And not everybody thinks in terms of art, but these are pretty simple connections, and it's repeatedly said that he was a friend of Syd Barrett's and everything, but if you see this and you don't see something going on, then you don't really get a person, in my opinion. And you have to wonder if maybe that was kind of a block between them. I don't know. At any rate, I'd like to discuss for a moment the symbolism in the drawing. So let's talk really quickly about, before I continue on, I'd like to point out an exercise that we did in like a social class or a psychology class when I was in high school. And essentially, I'm also from a broken family. There were 2 people with fishing gear that were obviously heading out to go fishing, and we were supposed to write down our thoughts on these different pictures. And so I wrote down whatever I wrote down for that one. I remember writing down 2 people who are gonna go fishing. And the teacher said, "This is a picture of a father and a son that are going out fishing together." And I had gone fishing with my father when I was really young. But at some point, that was broken and I no longer recognized it. And I have to wonder if other people also have a failure to recognize those connections, and perhaps Syd consciously or even subconsciously was attempting to do that in this painting. If you've ever made paintings, then I'm sure everyone has had the experience, if you've made art of any kind, even a song, where you put something together and you're not exactly sure why or how, and then you look at it later and you're like, oh, that's interesting. That means something to me, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it's there. It's presented almost subconsciously in the piece of artwork, almost like a dream. So those are all kind of my thoughts for that. The last thing I'd kind of like to point out is the symbolism itself of the painting. And again, I'm going to use Cirlot's Book of Symbols, Dictionary of Symbols. The first one is his discussion on the representation of what a lion means. And a lion as a symbol means a number of different things to different people, obviously. But because of its color, which is gold, it can represent the sun, and it can represent gold. And for that reason, if it's an old lion, it can represent a setting sun, and if it's a young lion, it would represent a rising sun. He also mentions that for Jung, and Jung, J-U-N-G, the psychologist, and Jung, I think, was quite important to this era. I haven't really discussed him yet, but I plan to eventually. For Jung, there were subconscious, irrational, and deep meanings to things like dreams that a lot of other people, like Freud, just kind of threw away, and a lot of times said they don't really necessarily mean anything. There definitely are different kinds of dreams, but I'm inclined to agree with Jung that there are very clear meanings to certain things in dreams. And for that reason, there also are very clear meaning to certain works of art. So this is what kind of comes from Cirlot's book. For Jung, the lion in its wild state is, broadly speaking, an index of latent passions. It may take the form of a sign indicating the danger of being devoured by the subconscious or the unconscious. So in that sense, it's more related to the symbolism of being devoured. So let's go ahead and look at what obviously this is a case of being devoured. It looks like they're about to be devoured by lions, correct? So what exactly is the meaning of being devoured? Now, he says this symbol finds its literal expression in the act or fear of being devoured is found in the modified form of entanglement, sinking into mud or a swamp, being swallowed by a whale. These are all things that tie in with the idea of being devoured. On the cosmic plane, the symbol doubtless relates to the final swallowing up by the earth of each human body after death, dissolution of the body, so that symbol may well be related to digestion. In consequence, all those stories which have a happy ending, where someone is devoured but then somehow miraculously survives, those have a tie to the Christian dogma of resurrection. So, I would like for you to look again at that painting, or consider it again. Notice that his father is walking into darkness towards two lines of crosses, two lines of arches which represent a cross, and the fear and terror of that boy's face, and perhaps his hope that his father will be reincarnated on some level or reborn, or perhaps ascend to heaven. And I don't know that all this is going on, but I think that you can see that it's all being represented here to some degree. That may be what's intended. I don't know. You make up your own mind. And I would like to point out one other thing, and that is this. If you think that this symbolism may be accurate in this painting, consider the source. This is a young man. He's like 19, 20 years old at the time. I don't know exactly how old he was when he made this painting, but how many people that are in their teenage years that you know would be capable of making a piece of art like this? I have not known very many. It's this deep on this many levels. So I guess that's just about all I'd like to say. One other thing I'd like to point out is that there was another person, Jim Morrison, who was very voracious in appetite with books. And I recall going to the library many times when I was young and reading about philosophers like Rousseau and Voltaire and Locke. And I used to just pass many, many hours in the library by myself reading, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I don't see people doing that now because of the intervention of technology and electronics. And it's a little bit disturbing to me, but I don't think that a lot of people now, unless they are living a certain lifestyle, are going to even find it believable that someone who is this young could have been that well read and that well considered, that he's considering the symbolism of devouring, that he maybe has read through, that he's read through Jung, that he's considered psychological development, he's considering his dreams, he's considering his family relationships, he's considering the very nature of death. And it's all in this one painting. Anyway, I hope you liked the episode. And I'll see you soon. I'm going to try and put out another episode, I don't know, maybe in a week.